Hi, everyone. I'm Gretchen Jones here with Kelly Morgan today. Hi, Kelly. Uh,
Hi.
we are talking about distribution and go-to-market strategy for emerging spirits brands. Thank you for joining the SIP educational session. So happy to bring it to you. We will begin, but Kelly, first, please tell us more about yourself.
Yeah. So I've been in the industry almost 20 years. I started at Diageo when I was just 24. I always joke my only life skill at this point is beverage alcohol. But I started at Diageo focused on analytics, moved into sales. They had a phenomenal training program back in the day. From there, I pivoted to Beam Suntory and Constellation, where I really honed my sales, national account, marketing, and then finally in sales and distribution strategy at Constellation before I left the big corporate world. I will say those roles for me have been pretty fundamental. I got the opportunity to manage an almost $250 million business running California and Hawaii, managing large budgets, learning how to talk to the C-suite, manage PMOs, RFPs, contract negotiations. My career has not exactly been linear, but I do think those experiences gave me a pretty specific lens. I know how the distributor thinks, what makes them prioritize a brand, what a supplier looks like on the inside of the machine, and also what emerging brands are missing because they don't have access to that playbook. Since then, I launched Crafted Advisors. So we are built to help close that gap. We bring enterprise level commercial strategy and advisory work to brands that can't yet afford to have a VP of sales, a route to market lead, a full commercial strategy team. And so it's become one of my greatest joys, leaving the Goliath and taking that knowledge to help folks as they build and scale.
No, I love that. Welcome, Kelly, and thank you so much. So we're doing things differently today. Q&A sesh. I'm going to ask the questions, and Kelly's going to give us all of her knowledge and insight. Here we go. Are you ready, Kelly?
Yes. Let's
Okay.
jump in.
First question. Okay. So, what's the core problem in kind of the spirits world you keep seeing? What's the gap? And I guess what's the gap most emerging and mid-size brands kind of fall into?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the common mistake I see, at least with the brands that I work with, are they treat distribution as the goal, and it's not. So distribution solely the infrastructure. For me, I think what you do within that infrastructure is where the actual business emerges. Many brands sign with a wholesaler, and then they're just, oh, the revenue's going to follow. But the distributor has 500 plus SKUs. They have quota obligations. You are one line item. And sometimes as a small brand, you're not even a line item. So I think what's missing most for folks is almost always a strong commercial plan. So specific, measurable account level strategy. How are you going to build velocity? I think the biggest thing is you are responsible for creating that demand. I would yell that from the mountaintops if I could. A house without a solid foundation will fall. So, you have to learn how to be brilliant at the basics. Wholesalers can open doors, but ultimately, I think execution is what drives velocity and long-term growth. And I don't mean that as a platitude. I truly believe it's the single most important thing that I try to get brands to internalize is commercialization of your brand can be more important than your marketing initially, at least your social media following. It's going to be how you truly scale. And in the 3-tier market, it's essential for how you get focus at the wholesaler.
Gotcha. Very well said. Foundation key. I love it. Next question for you. So, the commercial reality. Let's talk about distributors and what they actually want. So, you've sat in the room on the supplier side, and what makes a distributor genuinely like prioritize a brand, and what gets you kind of quietly deprioritized?
I think a lot of times we forget distributors are solely in the business of making money. There is a reason most wholesalers are still private and family owned. It can be a big money business if done well. And so they make money solely on velocity and volume. Cases moved per rep per day. That's it. And everything flows from that math. So as a small brand, you clearly don't have the volume, but you can create a velocity story. And I think that requires a pretty strong commercial strategy. So let's say a rep carries 300, 500 brands or SKUs. They're going to lead with the brands and the SKUs that are, one, the easiest to sell, the ones that make them look good, or the ones that they're commercially and contractually obligated to deliver on. So think of the contracts that big suppliers have with wholesalers. You have to find a way to earn a spot in that conversation. So what gets prioritized first and foremost, and I think is one of the most overlooked things, is be easy to work with. If your wholesaler doesn't like you, it is the fastest way to move to the bottom of the list. From there, prioritizing consumer demand signals, a brand story that sells itself at the bar, that is funded in activation support, that has a founder that's regularly showing up in market, those that come to the table with a commercial toolkit already defined and built and ready to deploy, those tell a rep that they're not selling alone. The fastest way to get deprioritized, no in-market support or investments, unclear targets, no depletion goals. So if you're just coming in with fast and loose conversations, a brand that treats a wholesaler solely as just their logistical vendor, yes, they do primarily play the role of logistics, but it is truly a partnership business, and you have to view it that way. Otherwise, they will ignore you. I think the best supplier distributor relationships I've seen, at least, are built on that mutual accountability. So you bring the plan, the resources, the presence and market, and they'll bring the network and the execution for your team to deploy. And you have to figure out a way to marry those two in a way that ties back to where your brand is at in their life cycle. So based on their size, you're not going to get 12 months of programming as 1,000 case brands in a wholesaler's book, and being realistic about that.
Gotcha. Just constantly rooting for yourself, like, and pushing and meeting the right people. Yeah, that's real. Okay, I love this question. Consolidation, seeing it everywhere, and it's really changed the game. Roughly started with 3,000 wholesalers to 1,200 in 30 years. I guess, what does that mean in practice for craft or even emerging brands today?
Yeah. So Southern Glaciers historically RNDC, and we can chat more through the chaos that is RNDC. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to give my opinion there. But Southern RNDC, Breakthrough, Johnson Brothers, soon to be Reyes, a handful of others, but they control the majority of U.S. spirits volume. The top U.S. wholesalers control 70+% of the sales. And the market's more consolidated than it has ever been in any point in history as the large houses continue to buy up the small wholesalers. The wholesaler is, what I've heard, at least rumor has it, currently they're reducing or restricting the brands in their book. So what I've heard is Breakthrough is currently on the path to reducing their SKU count by 30%. Southern Glaciers is supposedly not accepting any brands and new brands for the time being until they get their house in order, unless you have a pretty robust volume or value story to share with them. Johnson Brothers is being extremely strategic. There's going to be a ton of fallout of this RNDC Reyes piece of brands that don't have a home. So realistically, craft and emerging brands are going to be competing in that same space with brands that sit with larger suppliers and wholesalers today. That's a pretty substantial hurdle for folks to get over. I think in addition to the consolidation piece, there have been pretty substantial layoffs, specifically impacting fine wine and craft spirits teams, on-premise teams. And my hope is this is going to result in a revival of local and regional wholesaler teams. But typically, I think for folks that might be joining a call like this, that's probably the best place to start. What's going to go on at the big houses is going to be pretty chaotic over the next couple of years. The more concentration you see in the bigger books, so in the bigger houses, means that each rep is representing way more SKUs, way more accounts than they ever have before. So you might have a rep that's calling on 120 accounts. They have 500 or 1,000 brands. That's barely manageable on the best day, let alone when you're trying to build a brand from low volume. So the brands that are getting attention are the ones that have proven velocity, have serious marketing dollars behind them. And that's not going to be a craft story. It might be there's some diamonds in the rough, some flash in the pan brands, but ultimately for everyone else, you have to take ownership. So larger suppliers are going to have built-in leverage with their contracts. So they get co-op funding, dedicated overlays, buyer relationships, and that's not going to change. But that doesn't mean you can't compete in that space. The shift towards consolidation just means that you have to stop trying to be everywhere and you have to be really strategic. So go deeper in fewer markets, focus solely on building real velocity and a subsegment of accounts. Use that proof to then expand that account universe and eventually expand markets in general. But a brand with strong velocity in 3 markets is going to be infinitely more attractive to a distributor and an investor if you're looking to source investment dollars, and an investor than a brand with weak velocity in 15 markets. So your coverage across the country is somewhat irrelevant. What matters is are you building depth of relationships and depth of execution, not breadth of it.
Absolutely. So more intentional always. Yeah. Quality, not this huge expanse.
Mm-hmm.
No, it makes total sense. Okay. Next question. I actually want to ask something to follow up with that. How do you think the right number of markets to be in is right, like at any given stage, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I think that's a complicated answer because it looks different by category. If you are a whiskey or tequila right now, your challenges are going to look a little different because the market is compressing. And there's been a proliferation of SKUs over the last 10 years versus if you're a rum or gin, where you're operating in a smaller category, your consumer base is going to look a little different too. But if I were to give a generalized statement, I'd say starting in 2 to 3 markets initially and validate before expanding. So get depth of execution in those markets. There's actually a whole framework you can follow. I'm happy to share it after this call. But there's a framework you can use to check the boxes of if I am not checking all 4 of these boxes, I probably shouldn't expand markets yet. Because it costs a ton of money. And I think a lot of people overlook that. Once you have one market, you think it's just this quick follow, but it's not. And it's significantly harder to build your brand from 0 to $1 million. And then it's even harder to go from $1 million to $5 million. And that requires a really specific and targeted approach to scaling and expansion.
Gotcha. So staying like in your current market, when you're super successful in that one market, like what does that look like? I know. And then like, so this guide would help you like know when to expand to that next market where it's safe for you.
Yeah. So there's typically 4 metrics that you follow in this space. At least this is how I advise teams. And so before you expand, your existing business needs to be able to fund an overinvestment in what would be a new market. And so there's a framework that I typically follow. It's ERE, so earn the right to expand. And there's 4 metrics I would advise folks to focus on. So the first is velocity threshold. You should be consistent. You should be seeing consistent and repeatable velocity in your core accounts. So in the off-premise, think 2 to 3 cases per SKU per month per account that you should be pulling through organically. They don't require a ton of push. They're just pulling in that natural flow because you've done the due diligence to build that relationship and build that consumer base in that account. In the on-premise, it's going to look like consistent reorders every 2 to 4 weeks. If accounts aren't reordering, you actually don't have a growth engine. You just have a placement. And I think a lot of times we see placements as like, oh, well, we're in 150 accounts. But that's not always a true depiction of what's happening in market. So that then goes to the second piece, which is reorder. It's just another way to look at account health. About 60% of your placed accounts should be actively reordering month in and month out. And so if you're not at that threshold, you need to do the work first on your existing account placements to build that business before you think about adding even more accounts, whether it's in market or into a new market. The third component is operational readiness. I think a lot of people look at this and think production and operations, which is clearly important to ensure that you have the inventory to be able to support execution. But the bigger piece of operational readiness, I think, ties more to being able to support the market consistently. So are you able to fund people on the ground? Do you have a budget for activation? Do you have a budget to ensure you have appropriate wholesaler and trade spend to support execution? If you can't do that financially at this point, then you should stay where you're at and continue to stay focused. The last and fourth piece that typically I use in this framework is market depth. And I think this one is a lot of times overlooked. When we're chasing accounts in markets, a lot of times you're looking at a broad, key DMA or a broad market, and you have a pocket of accounts here and there. They're scattered all over the place. I think one of the greatest indicators of success is market depth. So do you have account clustering? So if you're within a 2 or a 5 mile radius, do you have 10 or 15 accounts that are actively selling and actively reordering, not just one? And if you can start to build that clustering, it allows you to expand where you're replicating success instead of searching for it, because you've created these pods of accounts that consumers are now becoming extremely aware of your brand. You're consistently seeing consumer pull and reorder. And that is one of the greatest indicators in my mind of, are you ready to go broader and get that breadth of execution instead of just the depth that you're searching for.
No, thank you, Callie. That makes total sense.
This is very long-winded. Sorry.
No, but I love it. I love the replication, knowing when things are working. No, it's so key. Okay, I will go on to our next question here. Okay. So you may have covered this, but one thing brands often don't fully understand before they sign, like franchise laws, termination rights. What should every operator, in this room right now know about legal structure, and what they're entering into, I guess?
Yeah, I spent a number of years negotiating our wholesaler contracts when I was with Constellation. Painful process, navigating, $2 billion plus contracts across the country. So I'm going to focus on a specific area because I actually think this is the one that's the most overlooked, which is the franchise beverage laws. So franchise states make it extremely difficult, sometimes legally near impossible, to terminate a distributor without cause. Cause is typically narrowly defined. It's decided by the state. So you might have a number of breaches in your contract or things you can explicitly state, and the state can still say, we don't really feel like that's material. So those laws were built post-prohibition to protect small local wholesalers from being for lack of a graceful way to say this, screwed over by big brands. Obviously, the wholesaler environment has changed. So even in franchise states, you have big wholesalers who are probably equally, if not more powerful than the brands they represent. So the practical implication here is the distributor relationship you sign in a franchise market is often the one you're going to be with for years. It's like a marriage. So choosing wrong can be a pretty expensive mistake. So before you sign any contract in a franchise market, one, understand the legalities in that state. Two, make sure you do visit their warehouse, look at their current book of brands they're representing. So are you going to be lost in the shuffle over the next 5, 10, 15 years? Talk to other brands they represent, which obviously through social media and LinkedIn, that's become way easier. Understand their market and channel coverage. So understanding kind of their accounts, brands, reps, what's a route look like. Ask explicitly what happens when a small brand isn't performing. There are some states that have protections for small brands that if you're less than a certain amount of liters in the case that, or in the state, you can move, but those are different by market. So I would ensure you always in those situations, and this ties to termination rights anywhere, but particularly in franchise states, negotiate performance expectations into the agreement. If you can't agree on what success looks like in writing from the upfront, that's a red flag before you've even started. If you're able to include skin in the game, so where the wholesaler also helps fund point of sale printing, price increases, discounting, floor reductions. There are ways to ensure that they are equally invested in what's happening with the brand. In franchise, just think of it like as you grow, they grow because they get to keep you for a really long time. And it's hard to leave them. So just ensure your model reflects that. The best question to ask them is like, what does your onboarding process look like for a brand of our size? And then what comes after that onboarding? And that should tell you a lot about how they partner. But I will say with any wholesaler, they're necessary evil and they play a significant role in our industry. But they also are really good salesmen. So make sure you're probing and asking the right questions and doing the right due diligence, because it is easy to be trapped into, particularly franchise, a bad contract and not be able to leave.
No, that is such great advice. Is it more common, like people don't know all the power that they might have before entering in? Like,
yeah, it's,
how much we can talk through. Like,
I think it's more talk through. Probably. As a smaller brand, you don't have a ton of leverage, especially if you're fighting tooth and nail to lock down a wholesaler in a market. So I think it's creating that open dialogue and asking for what you want. Usually my logic is ask for more than what you want, because through negotiations, things are going to come off the table. So if, if you want them to contribute, let's say 30% for any price increase, they're going to contribute, 30% initially out of the gates for the first X amount of months or whatever that looks like. So during that transition period, I would start at that 30% and assume that you might land either at 10 or 15%. If you want them to split your brand muscle point of sale printing costs, and you might ask for 50%, it might land at 30. And also acknowledge when you lose leverage. So like you aren't in a powerful place. So ask for what you want. Hopefully you lock down some of those key elements, but don't toe the line so much that you lose out on the opportunity. That ties back to earlier. We talked about like you want them to want to work with you. You want them to think you're easy to work with. So it's a fine balance between asking for what you want and need and ensuring you're not creating too many headaches.
No, I'm leaving.
Well, be a pain in the ass.
Yeah, totally. Love it. Okay, next question, if you're ready. Okay. What's the misconception you push back on the most in your advisory work? Maybe the things brands believe that actually holds them back.
I think the one I hear most common is like, oh, we got a distributor, period. So this misconception that if you could just get a distributor and get in distribution and accounts, that the revenue is just going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's probably the most frequent. It's dangerous because it is partly true, right? If you lock down a wholesaler, you're opening up the opportunity to way more accounts. If you get a placement in a retailer, you're finally in front of the consumer. And so that's why it makes it really easy to believe. But the reality this day and age is there are way too many brands and SKUs, whether it be at the wholesaler or when you're shopping your local liquor store or at the back bar. Um, it's it's not enough to just be there. You actually have to put in the work to create demand. Um, the second one I think I hear a lot, and we somewhat talked a little bit about this before, is that a bigger distributor means bigger results. That the size of the prize is bigger at a bigger distributor. I would say that fit and attention matter way more than portfolio size at a wholesaler. You could grow your business significantly faster, significantly bigger at a small to mid-size wholesaler who genuinely champions your brands, where you have advocacy through their sales teams, you have executional support, because those are all things probably at a big house you're not going to get as a small brand because you're competing with so many other SKUs. The last, and maybe this one actually is the most important. I could perhaps, but I think underestimating the resource requirement, and I mean that both hours and money. Getting listed is just the beginning. The accounts that actually turn into reorders are the ones that are consistently in market. So they're visiting, they're educating, they're activating in market. I think that all the costs need to be built into your assumption of launching a market, and they're substantially more than most people plan for, to be fair. And so having someone who understands the industry and understands the commercial side of the industry can really help that, because they can give you some pretty good guidance of how you should be allocating funding. From my perspective, the brands I see fail, it's not because they have a bad liquid or a bad package. Typically they're failing because they ran out of runway before they built consistent velocity. So, and that usually just means they spread themselves far too wide too fast. Thinking that if I'm in all the places at all the accounts with the big wholesaler, I'm going to get all this revenue. And it's a much slower build than people anticipate.
Yeah, the slower the better. I mean, it's steady growth, right? Like
sustainable growth.
Sustainable growth. Yes, I love that. No.
Yeah. Sustainable growth is worth 10 times that initial out the gate pipeline fill that you might get in the first 3 months. You want accounts that are consistently pulling through your product.
Totally. No, that's great advice. Okay, let's move if you're ready.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go into more like building your GTM plan. So if we're getting tactical, if you're advising a distillery on where to start, like market selection, channel prioritization, account targets, what does that process actually look like? And I know you may have talked about this before, but I think
it's I think I can hit on different things. I think go to market is tough. Because a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. But I think from my perspective, you start where you have an unfair advantage. So I would start in your home market, a city where you already have relationships, a community that's already bought into your story. Distributor conversations are significantly easier when you can already show momentum. Retailer conversations are significantly easier if you can already show success.
Mm.
So I think that's the strongest place to start, is where your founder or your team can consistently be in market for you, advocating for the brand and helping create demand. I also highly advise leveraging direct to consumer, D2C, to build some backbone to your story. And that's easier than it's ever been. There's actually a company called Ship Kindred, and they do DTC, but they do it a la carte method. So based on where the size of your brand, that you can kind of pick and choose how you're leveraging that in a way that you're not carrying big monthly fees. So getting into DTC is cheaper and more approachable than it's ever been. And I think a lot of times people overlook that for spirits. Obviously, it's way easier to ship beer or wine, but there have been so many advancements in the framework for DTC for spirits that it gives you sales. It also gives you intel, consumer intelligence, like what marketing works. You can do a lot of kind of pilots and see what works and what doesn't. Channel sequencing, I think, is extremely important. So on premise first in almost every case, with the exception of there are a handful of brands that inherently off premise play can be key. But from my perspective, bars and restaurants are a unique place because they'll tell your brand story. They help you build credibility. They're amazing trial opportunities to generate word of mouth, and that word of mouth and those consistent reorders in an on-premise account allows you to then chase placement in off-premise in neighboring liquor stores or independents, or even, small multi-door outlets. So I would say when you're chasing the channel, then the next step is, okay, where am I prioritizing this business? Pick 25 or 40 accounts out of the gate. 70% of them on premise, 30% of them off premise. Not a category, not a whole channel. I mean, like specific named accounts. Know the buyer's name, their call night, their back bar philosophy. If it's an off premise account and you can't secure shelf space, go in the door and have a counter unit or a display piece and say, hey, like, I'm willing to partner with you. If you're willing to partner with me on a trial, let's see if this moves. Here's how I'll support it. So being really strategic and having a depth of execution in just, like 30, 40 accounts. I think I've harped on this 15 times already, and I'll probably keep doing it. But I think a brand doing $5,000 a month in one market is way more fundable and way more attractive than the same brand doing $5,000 a month across 10 markets. Because then you're talking like $500 a month across 10 markets, which is like, you have no story. And so I think that would probably be how the process I advise my team on, which is how do you start where you matter most and your identity is relevant, be really strategic in where you're doing it and why, and then ensure that you have that depth of execution in those subsegment of accounts to build the story.
Gotcha. Kelly, when you were talking about DTC, does that include like events, like showcasing your brand at an event?
Yeah, so typically not. So direct to consumer is usually perceived as like your online sales. So, the buy now logic from your website, which was been mastered by wine and beer. Regulations have made spirits really, really hard. What we've seen is a number of liquor stores and other accounts almost operating like fulfillment centers in individual markets to keep it legal. And then you have these third-party DTC folks who can behind the scenes coordinate all that logic. Right. Event sales are not typically, they don't typically roll up into that direct to consumer sales. Those would be in a specific kind of like marketing event.
Gotcha.
Sales. Okay.
Yeah, I was just thinking in a way like to get people to try your product, like when you're going to events. I have a huge event background, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I
Well,
think
and
it's
events can be tough
better.
because depending on the event, a lot of times you as the brand are actually responsible for providing samples, like free events. So you're not actually selling anything. And so I
Mhm.
would say with events, they can play a really awesome role. They
Mhm.
can also bleed you dry. And so they
Yeah.
have to be really the right account that has the right consumer. And then you have to look at it almost like a marketing spend
Right.
from a P&L standpoint. Uh, because you're just trying to drive brand awareness, you're trying to show your wholesaler that you're willing to get in front of consumers and be in
Mhm.
market and support the brand. So they play different roles depending on the event. There are events where people pay for product too, but those usually require a special license.
Totally. Yep. No, thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
That helps. Okay, next question. Walk us through the pitch. When a brand sits down with a prospective like distributor, what
Mhm.
does a winning conversation look like versus one that loses the room?
Yeah, people might not like my answer. But so losing the room to me looks like leading with your liquid and talking about your brand story. And I feel like a lot of times for distilleries, for emerging brands, it's like calling their baby ugly. They just like that. No one likes to hear that. But the reality is that's just marketing. You probably ignore my dog in the background. You probably have an amazing story. You probably do. But so do 100 other brands, and everybody's story is unique and distinctive. And we found my grandfather's mash bill recipe in the attic, and like there's always a hook. And that doesn't mean your story doesn't matter. Your marketing can play as it pertains to your social media, as it pertains to PR and media. Hopefully you can't hear my dog. I don't know what he's
I
barking
can't,
at,
but it's
but
okay.
this is a very
No,
human moment. Um,
I love human moments.
but for distributors, that's not, they represent tons of brands that are amazing liquids and have really cool stories. So they're business people. Winning looks like, here's our target consumer. Here's the velocity we've built. Check out our DTC reorder rate. So, for every customer that buys product on our site, 70% of them come back and buy again in the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Whatever, that story is. Here are the specific markets and accounts we want to activate in. Here's the in-market support we're committing to. Those are what matter to them because they can do something with that. And it tells the story that you are also building the brand with them, that you're not expecting them to take in the product and then say, like, thank you for your partnership and walk out the door. So bring the data early, like be prepared for those conversations. You brought up events before. So event sell-through, on-premise reorder rates, social proof, like consumer following and engagement and all of that. Any press you have, any ratings and awards. That's not relevant for all categories, but I will say in spirits more so than others, it does matter. And for spirits, for ratings and awards, unlike wine where you're going vintage by vintage, and so you have to like resubmit and fund it every year, you get some strong runway from ratings and awards on the spirit side. It's not like your mash bill is changing. It's not like you're sourcing agaves from a different place or your distillery
Right.
changes. But anything that signals consumer demand. So the question every distributor is really asking is, will this brand sell itself? Or am I going to be carrying it and it's hard and annoying and it takes up warehouse space? Your job is to answer that question before they even ask it.
Gotcha. No, that's so key. I feel like in my career with marketing, like there always had to be some kind of marketing story, right? And that
Mhm.
was going to differentiate you always. But without that sustainable growth plan, like you said, like it's not gonna be enough. Like,
You need general marketing, right? You need your brand architecture, you need your brand identity. Um,
yeah.
but when you look at the funnel as a young brand,
Mhm.
Commercialization is the biggest piece of, can you take that big idea, that liquid, that story, and actually distill it down to understand who my consumers are, where do they shop, why would they pick me up, how am I going to get in front of them, what am I doing to drive trial? If you're not doing those things, the story doesn't matter. There's thousands of brand stories out there, and it's why we see so many brands within 2 to 3 years just somewhat disappear, because some brands spend way too much money on the above the line and completely ignore the below the line, which is where kind of the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, no, I love that you said that. That really hits, and it just makes sense now. Next question.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so once you're in, what does an effective commercial plan look like, and what are the non-negotiables? If I said that right.
So I'll probably hit on a couple of things that I've already talked about, and there's a reason these things are being repeatedly flagged in this conversation, but specific account targets by channel. We talked about lighthouse accounts. So having a market isn't a strategy. You want folks that are super focused and prioritized with names. They have, we call it like blackout bingo, like where are they hunting? So, if you are chasing a list of 30 on-premise accounts, you're going after, and that needs to be paired with an activation toolkit to start. Your commercial plan clearly needs to have KPIs and key measurables. So depletion goals by market, by quarter, ideally agreed in writing. Vague goals ultimately let everyone off the hook. So, and that's true in-house with you as well as your wholesaler. So if you have a dedicated sales resource or you're leveraging a 1099 sales resource, if you're not agreed to numbers, there's really no foundation to begin with. So like the logic is, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it realistically. The activation toolkit and calendar, from my perspective, is essential and a lot of times overlooked. I've seen a number of brands launch with a wholesaler and then they start building this, versus when you're launching with the wholesaler and you're kicking off at the GSM, everyone already has what they need to deliver, because you have a very short window after launching with a wholesaler to be relevant before something else comes along. So your activation calendar and toolkit is basically what you're doing in market every month. So staff trainings, samplings, events, market visits, cocktail calendars, display and program drives. Are you deploying whiskey dinners, tequila dinners? And then who owns it? So who's responsible for deploying that program? Is it you, Mr. Founder, Mrs. Founder? Is it an agency? And there are tons of agencies you can partner with, and they cost money, but they're not offensively expensive. Is it an expectation of the wholesaler? Because if you're asking them to put more work on their plate, you have to assume low execution rates. And you also need to ensure what the budget's like. What are you spending on those things? Folks, a lot of times they'll launch with a wholesaler and don't account for a sampling budget. Like the sales team actually needs to be able to pull a sample to trial it. And that costs money, and that can build really, really fast. And God love wholesalers, but a handful of them sometimes pull product just to take home to sample at home. So accounting for those dollars in the budget, what's your outcome in your activation toolkit? Like, what do you expect to happen? That can be a tough sell for some founders and distilleries, because some of the spend doesn't always immediately translate into a return. Some of that spend is the value in it is driving awareness and trial, which you don't usually see the benefit of for 60, 90, 120 days later. Right. How do you get in the consideration set with a consumer or a customer? A lot of times you have to visit a customer consistently over 60 days before they'll bring your product in. And so those all feel like sunk costs, but they're not. They pay dividends in the long run. The other piece I would say in your commercial plan is going to be incentive programs. They get a bad rap, wholesaler incentive programs, but they are expected. And the reality is reps chase money. So I would understand within your wholesaler, like how DAs work, depletion allowances, post offs, distributor programming budgets and scheduling and quotas and goals all work, and use them strategically rather than reactively. You're not going to, as a small brand, be on goal for the wholesaler 6 times a year. I think you push for 4. Realistically, you'll probably land at 2, and ensure those are during really strategic windows for the brand, whether it's seasonally driven or program driven. And this is where an incentive program can play, because you're probably not going to secure those goals without having an incentive program. And I would remember that you can incentivize execution, not just distribution, not just pods and placements, because a pod means nothing if the consumer doesn't know it's there. So I would include, typically a lot of times you can include a 2-layer incentive. So they're initially chasing placements for the first 30 days or 60 days. And then you have a follow-up incentive or kicker that is focused on sampling, menu and features, reorders. So you can say, hey, Mr. Distributor, you're going to make $25 per placement over the next 30 days. And then, hey, Mr. Distributor, for the next 4 months after that, I will pay your reps $50 for every reorder, or whatever that looks like, right? Another $25. I always think the bigger payout structure, leaning on the execution, the follow-through piece, the pull-through is more important. But you don't have to just look at incentives through the lens of pods and placements. The last piece on the commercial plan, and I probably rambling, but your review cadence with the wholesaler. So it's really easy to get lost in a wholesaler as a small brand. So having a really clear business rhythm, monthly check-ins with the portfolio lead, or if you have a partner DM or area manager based on a key DMA, where you're actually running through these tactical elements. You're running through your account targets and your velocity rates and your reorder rates. You're running through account penetration. Like we're at 36% of our goal. You're looking at the depletions versus goal by month, by count, quarter. So you understand what you're chasing. You review the activation, the incentive performance, and that provides a space for you to then tweak and adjust for the next 3 to 6 months, right? You use that time with the wholesaler to review what's been done. So a little bit of rear view mirror, but then a lot of that time needs to be focused on, okay, what's working, what's not. For what's not working, how do we tweak it and adjust it and deploy it out to the teams as quickly as possible?
Kelly, I love this. No, this is like transparency. It should be like a normal thing that happens. Like, no, that would keep everyone on track. I love it.
It's easier said than done, to be fair. I mean, locking down your wholesaler can take what you feel, you turn into a little bit of a stalker. But if you can once you sign the contract, if you can get those calendar holds already scheduled and locked down, then that time is protected and you're not chasing it later.
Yeah, I love it. And I love incentivizing execution. That is everything. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen that in any realm I've been in in a sales team kind of setting. So I love that. Okay. We have more questions. Okay.
It probably does with me.
I like to
here I am.
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready for feet on the street?
Okay. Yeah.
Brand ambassadors, market visits, staff trainings. What's the real ROI here? And how should a small brand think about it against everything else competing for their budget?
I think on-premise trade advocacy is one of the highest ROI activities for a small brand. And it costs money, right? Like activating in a on-premise account, getting them to be a relationship partner is hard. And it takes time. But a bartender who loves your product and talks about it unprompted is more valuable, in my opinion, as a small brand than any ad spend you can do. Like the math behind a well-run staff training at a high volume on-premise account can move way more cases in a month than a week of distributor rep activity. So, and that's not an exaggeration. I was working with a brand. This was in Georgia, in Atlanta, and they were moving, I think it was like 2 bottles a month, not even a full case. Chased down an account that was on our Lighthouse account list, and we took them from 2 bottles a month to like 10, 11 cases a month just by partnering with them on staff education and securing a menu feature. One cocktail on the menu, took them from 2 bottles a month to 10, 11 cases a month. And so that time and investment pays dividends. I think activation tactics that actually work. So education first sampling, and you need to have a purchase mechanism of some sort there, whether it's a recipe card, a coupon that only is handed out by the sampler, right? It's not just broadly deployed. And you have to navigate the legalities of that by state. But education first sampling in the off-premise, that is an opportunity. And it has to be strategic. So like a generalized sampling event can be a waste of time, but ones that are in the right account at the right time. So Friday, Saturday from, 3 to 7, like you don't want to be at Tuesday from noon to 3. That's a wasted spend from a sampling dollar standpoint. Targeted trade nights. So how are you getting in front of the trade in an organic way that eventually makes them want to partner with you at their account? Back bar placements with conversion expectations. So trying to lock down those menus and features. Comp bottle paired with follow-up visit. That feels like a sunk cost out of the gate. But if you legally can do this in your market, of letting them take a bottle and see how it does, and let them push it, see what their consumers say, see what, and that can create an opening. As long as you have a good brand and good liquid and good cocktails, that can create an opening to then lock down legitimate long-term menu features. Off-premise, like trial size free goods. If you make multiple sizes, if you have 50 mLs or 375s, it sounds annoying, but if you can do legally in your state, again, I'll provide that precursor. But if you can do a buy 3 cases of our 750 milliliter and lock down, a case of 50 mLs or, a sleeve of 50 mLs, whatever that looks like. 1, you're improving their margin. 2, you're also giving them a vehicle of small size to trial and to get out the door. Bar spends to drive on-premise activity. If you secure an on-premise placement, commit to them over the next 3 months. We're going to come in and spend at least $150 every month at your account. First rounds on us, where you're doing bar spend and you're getting consumers to try it and sample it. You're showing that account you're a good partner and you're committed to pulling through the inventory they brought in. Event activation. I will tell you what doesn't work, at least in my experience. Mass sampling events with no follow through. We kind of hit on that when I was talking about sampling. Pay to play tactics at accounts that I know everybody likes to say, well, illegal, pay to play it plays a role in our business. We're clearly seeing that in California with some wholesaler unnamed execs being brought up on charges. You're buying your business then. That's not relationship building business. It's transactional. The moment you stop paying them, they're going to move away from your brand and move to a brand that starts paying them. So those dynamics don't pay out in the long run. Price discounting too early. It needs to be strategically done. And then activation that's disconnected from your brand story. Sometimes you're invited to participate in, a consumer facing event or a local event. And if it doesn't have a hook that is relevant to your brand story, that's a wasted spend. Spray and pray approach. If we're just like throw everything out there and see what happens, like everyone knows that. The reality is like you can't outspend a Diageo, but you can show up, you can out educate them, you can out authentic them. I don't think that's a word, but at a local level. And that can be your competitive advantage. Like there is a way to do this in a way that creates meaningful long-term results.
I love it, Kelly. Now, I want to say we're coming up on our hour and I don't want to leave quite yet. So this has been amazing. Great. I appreciate your knowledge and insight and all of this. So how about we do one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So I guess I love this question. So you've worked at Diageo and Beam Suntory. You know what the big machine looks like from the inside. What can a craft brand do that those companies genuinely cannot?
Ooh, it's interesting because I think a lot of times we forget the really big brands are like the Titanic. It's really hard for them to pivot. So one of the biggest benefits a smaller brand has is speed. You can pivot your story. You can take consumer insights that you learn and quickly update your creative, your sell sheets, your whatever it is. You can respond to a trend, change your activation plan, shift your channel focus. You can do all of that in like days, weeks. For a large supplier, that takes quarters, if not an entire planning cycle. And so like you have brands right now that are actively planning at large suppliers for 2027. And so like you have this speed to market that they don't have. Authenticity at the account level in particular. A founder walking into a bar and consistently showing up, ordering a drink, telling the story, having real conversations, that creates a relationship that big suppliers just don't have. I assure you, the like CEO of Beam Suntory isn't just regularly out doing account visits that aren't just like milk runs, right? That the wholesaler has already curated their visit plan. So you have something that's super unique and can't be replicated. I think niche in your narrative ownership, so you can truly own a neighborhood, a city, a state. You have that like community and cultural moment piece that the big brands just lose as they grow. So if you're going to grow, like leverage that now while you can, because eventually, Tito's was authentic to the Texas story, right? And Austin and all this, and it was Texas roots for so long. And that's somewhat been lost, not because Tito's doesn't want it to exist. It's just they're a big national brand now. You can't play that small guy authentic story for long. Proximity to the consumer and customer, you get to hear the feedback, you get to make pivots. I think the biggest trap is don't try to compete with the big boys. Like they're going to outspend you. It's just, don't try to compete with them. Instead, try to do something completely different. Foster deeper relationships, be more human, be more local. They just can't play in that sandbox.
Be you. You got this.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh no, Kelly, it's almost up here, and I had such a great chat with you. Is there anything else you would like our SIP viewers to know, or any advice? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I guess Parting words. One, I have some tools and stuff I'm happy to send to the group.
Gotcha. Oh no, I lost you, Kelly. I lost Kelly, but I want to thank everyone for viewing this today. This will be live on our YouTube channel. And thank you for joining us, and join SIP today. We will have Kelly's contact info in our Facebook group.
Did you lose me?
I lost you. I was, yeah. So I was ending it. No, you're back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
You asked if there was one last thing I would say to distilleries.
Yeah.
I would say if you pull your depletion report and your data, if you don't have one, call your distributor and get it today, or get access to their system. It will show you exactly where your brand is building momentum and where it's stalling by account. Like, go hunt. If you already have it, identify your top 5 accounts by velocity, visit them this week, do a deep dive into what's working. What are you doing differently in those accounts versus others? And because the brands that are winning in this space, they're not always the most innovative or the best funded. They're the ones that are better hustlers. They stick with it. And so they're present, they're consistent, they're commercially clear. And those are all things you can choose to be. And so I think the getting under your business today from a commercial standpoint is first understanding what's working with your business today at the commercial level.
Yeah. No, thank you, Kelly. I'm sorry we lost you for there.
No, it's all right. I was about to be like, all right, peace. I'm out.
Yeah. Totally. Okay. Well, thank you, Kelly. Thanks for joining us in our SIP group here. You can find Kelly's contact info if you want to follow up on our Facebook group page.
Sure.
Happy to share that with anyone who has any questions. But it'll be available to you. Reach out to me. But yeah, thank you for joining. Join SIP, and have a great day. I guess that's all we have. Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. All right.
All right. Thanks, Gretchen.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.